last time I visited these mountains, we at Overdrive came here with an army of the top-of-the-line adventure motorcycles. All of us had our own picks. And I had picked the R1250 GS from that entire lineup. And looks like the market also responded in a similar manner, because you see the 1250 GS has been the best-selling GS of all times. So when they wanted to create a new one would expect all they had to do was give it some design tweaks, add some electronics, give it a few more features, and it would have been an instant hit. But BMW decided to go back to the design board, design the GS from the ground up, all new, every nut and bolt, all new. Was it really necessary? Or did they just mess up a winning formula? And if you're looking to buy yourself a flagship ADV, should you consider this one? If you already have a 1200 or a 1250 GS, should you consider upgrading? All these answers are going to be in this review, so hang on tight.
Over the generations, the GS has gained weight like a successful businessman, and the new iteration fixes that. One glance at the R1300 GS reveals a more streamlined look than its predecessors. While many fans appreciate the GS for its heft and road presence, the new model lacks that imposing size, almost making the black variant resemble a GS 310 or 900 in the rearview mirror. However, the lighter design appeals to a significant number of prospective buyers who previously found the bulk of the GS intimidating, deterring them from even considering a test ride. From this perspective, the big headline is that the 1300 GS is 12 kgs lighter.
Notice the tubular frame and subframe on the 1250 GS. Now compared to that, the 1300 gets a lighter stamped sheet metal mainframe and an aluminium subframe. The new geometries have also allowed the designers to engineer the engine in such a way that the gearbox now sits under the cylinders instead of behind the cylinders like you have on the 1250. What that has essentially done is liberated more space for some of the other mechanical goodies.
Like a longer swing arm, for example, which gives the motorcycle better stability through corners and at speed, while maintaining a similar wheelbase to the outgoing model. The shaft housed within the swing arm is now stronger and requires replacement at 80,000 kilometers compared to the 60,000 kilometer interval of the 1250. The added mass of the new swing arm and the shaft is offset by a lighter engine and gearbox, saving 6.5 kilos, plus another 1.5 kilos from the new chassis and 900 grams from the wheels. These reductions, though modest on paper, contribute to a tighter mass centralization, enhancing the bike's overall balance and agility.
You will remember Ajit from the ADV shootout that we did a few years back. If you haven't watched it, do watch it already. Now, in terms of the weight reduction of the 1300 isn't immediately evident when you're trying to pick it off the stand, or in this case, Ajit, picking it off the sand. Thank you, Ajit. It is more evident, however, when you're riding around the twisties or on off-road terrains like these.
The GS has always felt nimble around corners, but the 1300 dives into them with more sharpness than before. The cylinders sit higher, offering better cornering clearance than before. The repositioned cylinders are also more in line with each other compared to the 1250, where the right cylinder sat a little behind and seemed to offer less room for the foot. Higher overall position not only provides more room now, but also makes the cornering clearance feel slightly better and more confidence-inspiring.
From an Indian perspective, what is also important is now the reliance on the water cooling is a lot more for this engine compared to the 1250 GS. You can even notice that the number of fins for the air cooling is much less on the cylinders compared to the 1250. So in our scenarios, in our crowded city streets, it should be more efficient with its overall thermal management compared to the 1250.
The improved cooling system has allowed BMW to make the 1300 engine a high compression one, boasting a ratio of 13.3:1, which means it could be more sensitive to bad or low octane fuel. The Boxer engine GS models have always felt exceptionally agile off the road compared to the other engine configurations, and this advantage is amplified further with the tighter mass centralization of the 1300. The lighter front end becomes apparent and boosts rider confidence even further, enhancing the overall off-road experience.
Now the light front end has its advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage that I see is that at highway speeds there's a bit of that floaty feel. Now BMW recommends that you don't put more than 10 kgs each side with the panniers, 8 kgs on top, and you don't go beyond 180 kilometers an hour with that luggage. The bike can easily do beyond 200. But with all that luggage, that floaty feel is probably going to get a bit amplified. The advantage is when you're riding downhill, maybe on-road, off-road, there's a more nimble feel to the front end, so it just makes it more confidence-inspiring. And the suspension will not have to work as hard to compensate for various accessories like the tank protection bars that people put, the big lights, auxiliary lights that GS owners like to put, and maybe even tool rolls, etc. So all of that is going to be very easy.
Apart from the boxer engine, the other magic potion that separates the GS from its rivals is the unique suspension. Unlike most motorcycles which use forks for wheel support, steering and front-end suspension, the GS employs a telelever setup. Here, a central spring strut handles suspension and damping, while the forks manage the braking dive and holding the wheel, of course. This results in minimal nosedive under cornering or braking, giving the GS a distinctive feel. Some riders may initially find the front-end feel artificial, but once accustomed, it instills confidence like no other motorcycle.
The 1300 takes it a step further. It's got a more evolved suspension setup compared to the 1250. That is why you will spot the word Evo even on the brochures. Now essentially, what that means is the gas canisters that you have for the front and the rear suspension, they now have their own little springs inside them as well. So when extra stiffness is required, when extra damping forces are required, those springs are employed, and that essentially makes this bike a whole different animal in the suspension game compared to the 1250. You will literally have to ride both the motorcycles back to back on your favorite terrains to understand what a vast difference it can make.
The 1300 GS offers 5 levels of damping adjustments that you can manually set in 3 presets: road, dynamic and enduro. Engaging any of these riding modes will apply the corresponding damping settings to the suspension. For a soft and cushy ride similar to the 1250 GS, I set the damping to 0. Setting it to -2 provided an even softer setting, perfect for trails and rocky patches. While setting it to +2 resulted in a much stiffer setup than even the dynamic mode on the 1250 GS.
They've also played around with the swivel bearings that you had on the 1250. So for example, on the top of both the forks on the 1250, you had these swivel bearings that allowed for that flex. So they've removed that, they've gone with a rigid setup there, and the swivel bearing is now sitting close to the neck instead. So that still gives you the flex that you need, but it still feels a lot stiffer. So it's not something like the S1000 XR when you're attacking corners, it's not going to be that stiff, but it's not going to feel as squishy when you're turning in as say the 1250 GS or some of the other adventure motorcycles. It still has a very taut feeling in comparison to all the other GSs that you may have ridden.
The adjustment further sharpens the 1300's handling around the bends. While the difference between the 1250 and the 1300's handling isn't massive, the advancements in the engine, chassis and the suspension will ensure that you will be faster, if that sort of a thing matters to you on a GS. But if you are an adventure tourer, as the GS expects you to be, the in-saddle experience of the 1300 is comparable to the 1250. As before, the suspension will auto-level and adjust preload to accommodate the weight of your pillion and luggage. However, you cannot manually lower the bike anymore like you could with the 1250 GS, which is a bit of a bummer. This functionality is now tied to the adaptive ride height feature, which is brilliant, but it isn't available on all variants, even as an option. If you do get the feature, you will benefit from additional powered assistance from the suspension when pulling the bike onto the main stand. Additionally, the bike will automatically lower itself at speeds below 30 km an hour, helping you get your feet down on the ground when you come to a halt at, say, a traffic light or an intersection, a feature that we've already seen with the Harley-Davidson Pan America and the updated Triumph Tiger 1200.
Unfortunately, we couldn't really put that adaptive ride height to the test because that is only available on the triple black version 2 and not on the other variants. So this variant here is the Trophy. This gets the taller seat height, 870 millimeters, which means that for my average Indian height of 5'8", I can still sort of get my feet down on the ground with proper adventure boots, but it might still feel tall for quite a few riders. So this is equipped with the Comfort High Seat by default, but BMW India assures us that they will offer low seat variants as well if you want to go with this particular paint job. Otherwise, it looks like it's squarely targeted at those who want to ride off-road more often, like the proper pros. I'm not one of them.
But that's another bummer, because unlike the 1250 GS, the seat isn't adjustable. You have to gamble and order your fixed seat height when booking the 1300 GS, which is a step back in my opinion. Regardless of the variant, the rider triangle is quite relaxed, and standing up to ride is easier on the 1300 thanks to the narrower seat profile. Our 170-odd kilometer journey was comfortable, but I suspect longer distances might be more comfortable on the 1250.
Now, a few key things about keys and batteries. For example, you get a new key fob. The battery management of this key fob, the wireless key fob, is much better than the outgoing 1250 GS. For example, it doesn't keep communicating with that screen all the time or the locks all the time. You have to literally pick up the key, give it a shake, it wakes up, then it communicates with the device, and then you can unlock the motorcycle and then do your ignition bit. You still need the laser cut key to open the seats. And speaking of batteries and keys, you remember if the key would run out of battery on the previous 1250 GS, you literally had to reach under the seat, get the key to interface with the electronic mechanism, and then unlock the vehicle. It was quite a stretch all the time. Now you don't need to do that. You don't even have to open the seat. You can simply just keep the key on the seat. It will interface with this little unit that you see here, and you will be able to unlock the vehicle and ride out even if the battery in this runs out. Now, the other bit is the battery, the actual battery. Gone is that side mounting of the battery, in comes a different placement. Now, getting to the batteries is not going to be very easy. If you have to replace the battery, you have to literally cut a few cable ties, remove the battery, and then again put a few cable ties in place. So that is going to be more cumbersome, but charging it over here shouldn't be a problem. Why I'm pointing that out is, on the 1250, you had the option of plugging in the charger into the 12-volt socket and it would charge the battery, right? You had that charger that BMW was selling. Those chargers are not going to work in case you upgrade to the 1300, because this battery is now a lighter lithium-ion unit. You will need a different charger if you want to put it in that 12-volt or even charge this directly, because your standard chargers are not going to be optimized for lithium-ion.
Enough has been said about the styling of the new GS, and I won't dwell on it. You will either love it or hate it. All I'll say is that the design was growing on me until I saw the 1300 and the 1250 side by side, and I must admit, the old elephant looks wiser. Speaking of wiser, the visor is now electrically adjustable, which is very convenient to use on the move.
We finally have an electronically controlled visor mechanism, and that's a good feature to have, because the previous one you had to use your hands to just reach out all behind the TFT and then turn it around. Here you can just do it on the fly using a little switch, and it just works really well. Of course, for that mechanism to keep working well in our dusty conditions, you have to make sure that it's well oiled, it's always properly clean and all of that. The other good thing is, even though the visor is electronically controlled, you will see additional holes right behind on the mounting mechanism. So if you want an even lower setting with the standard visor, you can do that. And if you still want an even smaller visor or an even bigger visor, those options are available not just from BMW, but from the aftermarket as well.
On the move, I found the weather protection to be excellent, maybe even better than the 1250, with very little buffeting. The bike also offers heating functions for the seat and the grips, perfect for cold or wet rides. The controls for the heated grips, visor and other shortcuts can be added to a new switch that looks like a sandwich emoji. It's not the most intuitive, but once you get the hang of it, you should be able to access all of these shortcuts on the move without repeatedly glancing at the screen. The rest of the screen and its functionality remain the same as the other new BMWs with the 6.5-inch cluster. The new fairing design gives the instrumentation a more freestanding look, eliminating the cluttered appearance of the previous model. This cleaner, more streamlined setup not only looks better, but also improves readability, accessibility, and visibility while riding. The boxer twin engine layout with pistons parallel to the ground, moving in opposite directions, has been the cornerstone for top-tier BMW GS models. This design imparts a lower center of gravity and unparalleled balance that defies the GS's weight. The new 1300cc engine is the largest and the most powerful boxer engine that the GS has ever had. While the 1250 GS isn't a slouch, the additional power, meteor torque band, and a taller 6th gear make the 1300 GS feel better at overtakes, city tractability, and highway cruising respectively. Despite a smaller 19-litre tank, which is 1 litre lesser than the 1250, the 1300 GS maintains the same range as the outgoing model, thanks to improved fuel economy at highway speeds, offering a real-world range of about 250 to 300 kilometers. A GSA with a larger tank is expected later this year.
Even if you were to ride the 1250 and the 1300 back to back, you're not really going to notice the difference in the power or the power to weight ratio either. But what you are going to immediately notice is that this engine runs a lot smoother. Of course, it's a brand new engine, but at the same time, it has been ridden by the entire media already. I'm on the last batch, and still the engine doesn't have any of those gruff notes. It's still not serviced either. So that is a very good thing. The other bit that I really like is that it's got a little bit more grunty character compared to the 1250. If you remember, the 1250 already had that grunty character when the shift cam came in. This one also has that, but that grunty character is amplified a little bit more. So I like that it feels refined at lower speeds, and when you start pushing it, it starts feeling grunty. However, if you're going to be riding at the higher revs all the time, which you don't really need to do on a GS and on this engine because it's still a very torquey motor, but if for whatever reason you're into sport riding, you're always going to be riding in the top revs, you will feel that the engine braking performance is a bit too sharp. Even for the road modes or whatever, it's a bit too sharp compared to the 1250. So that is something that may not be to everyone's taste. Now, speaking of the gearbox, you get a quick shifter with it. They've changed the mechanism somehow. So instead of a spring loaded quick shifter that you had on the previous 1250, this is now a more magnetic configuration. And I have my apprehensions about that because you see, even with the magnetic throttle, in our dusty conditions, there have been a lot of issues that people have faced through their ownership experience with the 1250. I hope the similar doesn't happen with the quick shifter. But as far as the shift quality goes, it is a marked improvement over the 1250.
Even the slightest touch of the foot can confuse the software though, leading to abrupt power delivery and false neutrals with this quick shifter. I would prefer to disengage it when not sport riding. Additionally, customizable engine brake control would be beneficial, as riding at higher revs in dynamic mode can cause the engine to cut speed sharply when off throttle. BMW has enhanced the braking performance of the new GS. It now features combined braking where engaging one brake, front or rear, partially applies the other as well. The brake force distribution depends on the riding mode, speed and IMU data. It works exceptionally well, and even off the road, the combined braking doesn't produce any unnerving front-end feedback, which is great for riders of all skill levels. Attracting riders of various skill levels is what the 1300 GS aims to do, with its friendlier lean stance, myriad of electronic aids, weight reduction, and easy handling dynamics. It refines the GS experience for existing owners and redefines it for new riders. Would I upgrade from a 1250 GS though? No. The price to benefit ratio simply doesn't justify an upgrade cost, which would be around 8 to 10 lakh rupees.
Like I said, each and every bolt on this motorcycle is new. Every component is new when you compare it to the 1250. So should you consider upgrading from the 1250? Maybe yes, maybe not. I have pointed out through this review what is good over the 1250. So if any of that makes a lot of difference for you, maybe you can consider upgrading. But the way I look at it, I don't see the upgrade from a 1250 to the 1300 being all that fruitful. It's something like you already were invested in equity, you took all your investments out and put it in mutual funds, but then the profit margins that you got were almost similar to what you were already drawing with the equity. Because even though all of this comes together quite nicely as an all-new motorcycle, over the 1250, it still feels like a couple of steps ahead. It just feels like a minor evolution, not a revolution of sorts. But if you have had anything prior to the 1250, like the 1200, 1100, 1150, etc., if you want to upgrade from there, embrace new technology, then the 1300 is still the best GS that you can buy. I think I will also recommend it over the other competition because you see, if you want something sportier, you're still better off with something like the Multistrada if attacking corners is all that you want. If you want it from BMW, the S1000 XR could make a lot of sense. If you want a hardcore off-roader, the GS may not be it. Something like the Desert X could do that better for you. In the looks department, well, it's not the prettiest, but the GS never was. So let's just leave that aside. But you know what it is good at? It is good at comfort in the saddle, both for you and the pillion. It is good at the way it handles, the kind of balance that it gives you thanks to the unique combination of that boxer engine and the kind of suspension choices it makes, which no other motorcycle in this segment does. And that's a very big plus point. So when all of this comes together, the GS, even in its 1300 guise, still remains the best all-rounder out there. And that's exactly what you want, the best all-rounder when you're shopping in the flagship ADV space. And the best just got better.